this thing is definitely falling apart a bit.
Coming out of place. Gearbox didn't fall out this time. I suppose we may as well get the clutch out and inspect it. From the factory.
Hello and welcome to this video. I'm Marcus Hayes, and today you join me from my happy place, the cockpit of my favourite car, Esther, the ST170 powered Mark 1 Escort, who has become a bit of a daily driver lately, it's fair to say. I haven't really been driving my Maud Mark 2 Escort much at all in the last couple of months. Now this thing is definitely falling apart a bit. There's a list of jobs that need to be done, and today it's time to start giving her the TLC that she needs and deserves, seeing as she is my favourite car. Now I've been up to a few things behind the scenes. Just now, for instance, I went to visit my friends at BODICRAFT in Watford to pick up some materials that I'm going to be using soon on Heidi, my other Maud Mark 2 Escort. Massive shout out to the guys at BODICRAFT, and don't forget, if any of you guys need any materials for painting on your cars or equipment, they do sell spray guns and stuff as well. You can get 10% off of everything at BODICRAFT in Watford by using my discount code MH10, and they're online as well, so even if you're not anywhere near Watford, go on their website, order what you need, use my discount code and save yourself some dough. What I'm going to be up to with Heidi, with those materials, is for another video. As I say, I'm going to be focusing on this thing today. I did actually go round to my other garage in this thing yesterday, and I was planning to dive into doing what I'm going to be doing today, but I had some other running around to do. For example, I went to see my platers to drop off some more bits to get zinc plated silver, again for Heidi. So once I'd done all the running around that I was planning to do, I didn't really have time to dive into doing what I wanted to do on this thing, because yeah, what I am planning to do is going to be quite time consuming, because today I'm hoping to solve finally the issue of the rattly clutch bearing on this thing. But whilst I'm doing that, there's some other things I want to look at along the way as well.
Alright, so I'm now deep into the first job of the day. But before I get into that, got to send a huge shout out to Gary Ball, who is the man that supplied all the carbon fibre that I've got on this thing, because he noticed something on this car from the in-car footage of a recent video. If we look at the inside of this rear quarter window, you can see that the rubber appears to be coming out of place. Now I did have a go at trying to put it back into place yesterday, but it doesn't seem to want to go. I've tried sort of holding the window from the outside while I'm doing it, and tried banging the window from the outside while I'm doing it. I don't know whether I need to take the window out and just refit it, or maybe this rubber has just shrunk due to the heat and it needs replacing. I don't know. I mean, if I push that hard enough, I do reckon that the window will pop out, but yeah, I don't think it's going to fall out from normal driving, so I'll just keep an eye on it for now. But maybe it's a great excuse to finally get some plastic windows for this thing to reduce the weight even further. Anyway, on with what I've been up to today. So I've been taking steps to get myself ready to remove Esther's gearbox. I started off by removing the shifter. I've also made another gasket for it because it seemed like this may have been leaking. I saw some oil, you know, around this area up well above where the prop shaft goes into the gearbox. So yeah, I think that gasket was leaking, so hopefully the new gasket will solve that. And then underneath the car, I've removed the prop shaft. That's just down on the floor over there, and I've inserted into the gearbox a prop shaft yoke, and I've cable tied it on, and that's just to stop any oil coming out of the gearbox. I've also got the jack underneath the gearbox, and I've removed the gearbox mount. One thing I didn't have to do was disconnect the reverse lights, because I forgot to plug those in last time I took the gearbox off. Now I've already removed all but 2 of the bell housing bolts. I've also removed the slave cylinder from the gearbox, which is what I used to do because it means you don't need to bleed the clutch. More recently, I have been disconnecting the clutch line whenever I do a job like this, which obviously means you do need to bleed the clutch when you put it back together. But I realised recently that I can get to the bolts that hold the slave cylinder onto the gearbox from underneath the car quite easily. So yeah, that's what I did today. And yeah, slave cylinder is up here out the way. I will be refitting the standard slave cylinder rod in place of this adjustable one, because I want to test things with the new bearing, with the standard rod, and then look at if I need to putting the shorter one in, which is what I was experimenting with the current bearing that's fitted. Oh, one thing I did before I did anything was obviously disconnect the battery. So I'm basically at the point now where I need to remove the final 2 bell housing bolts, and then we can get the gearbox off of the back of Esther's engine. Let's go. Hey, the gearbox didn't fall out this time. All right, so the release bearing is super easy to change. You just literally pull this off and slide the new one on. And yeah, I'm pretty certain that all the noise I'm getting is maybe not actually the bearing itself. It might just be everything rattling around in there, which hopefully will be solved by putting a return spring on here. So it just always has a little bit of tension back this way. Before I change this, I suppose we may as well get the clutch out and inspect it while we're in here. All right, let's check out the state of this clutch. Well, all the springs are still in there, which is something. Obviously, there's plenty of meat left on this clutch. I've probably done 1,000 miles, if that. But yeah. I mean, this friction plate isn't falling apart. All the springs are still there, so happy days. My very cheap £40 friction plate has handled all the abuse that I've thrown at it so far. Now, granted, I've only done 1,000 miles, but I have killed clutches in this car in less than 1,000 miles before. Admittedly, that was with the other RX-8 6-speed gearbox, so maybe a lot of my issues stemmed from that. You know, maybe the input shaft on that gearbox is a bit more worn than this one. I don't know. The pressure plate is absolutely fine as well. I know you can see those lines on the camera, but yeah, can't really feel any gouges out of it. This was a used pressure plate, of course. So yeah, I'm just going to throw this clutch straight back in the car. I'll use this input shaft as a clutch alignment tool, and then we can crack on with replacing the clutch release bearing and doing a little mod which will enable me to set up a return spring. All right, so now we'll get this bearing off the box, and I think I'm going to take the actual whole arm out as well to do the little mod that I want to do. Yeah, we can leave the rubber bit in there. So here's the old bearing, and the new one looks exactly the same, so that's a good start. One thing I have noticed though, I noticed before when I changed Esther's clutch that, you know, there's a little bit of play in this. I don't know if I can show that on camera, but the new one does have a little bit of play there as well. Slightly less, but still quite a bit. So maybe this bearing isn't as worn as I thought it was. I certainly think that the noise I've been getting is, you know, this thing rattling around in there more than anything, but we are where we are. We've got a new bearing, so we will fit it. One thing I have noticed, and again, I don't know if this is going to show up on camera, but this centre bit, it's not sort of dead square with the bearing. That centre bit is sort of tilted this way. Yeah, not sure if that's going to show on camera, but essentially this gap here between this piece and this piece is bigger here than here. So, you know, the inside bit is slightly tilted, and I'm guessing that's just to do with keeping this straight on the input shaft of the gearbox whilst this arm is moving when it's engaging and disengaging. So I'll have to figure out which angle looks best when I'm fitting it to the gearbox. But yeah, something I noticed. Now what I want to do with this setup this time is, as I say, modify it so that I can fit a return spring. And I've basically knocked up this little plate today, which is going to be mounted under the bolts that hold the slave cylinder onto the gearbox. So, you know, the gearbox is this way, engine is this way, so this will sit like that, with the 2 bolts going through the plate into the slave cylinder and ultimately into the threads in the bell housing. And then I've got a little bend on this and a little hole drilled in it. So that will sit like that. And then I can get a return spring and hook it into that hole, and then the spring will come this way. I've taken this off the slave cylinder, so obviously that sits like this. The slave cylinder will be here, so we'll call this the spring, and that will just be sitting there. And then I can just drill a hole in this arm for the other end of the spring to hook onto. So it'll hook onto this arm, hook onto the tab, which will be over here somewhere, and then just have a little bit of pressure pulled on this arm so that it's not all rattling around when your foot is off the clutch. That's my theory. Who knows whether it'll work? Who knows whether I'll actually need the return spring? Maybe I'll put it back together with a new bearing and there won't be any rattling anyway. But whilst it's all apart, now is the time to set it up for fitting a return spring if it is needed. So I need to decide whereabouts I'm going to drill this for the spring, and then put this all back together with the new bearing and of course this plate on the slave cylinder. All right, I've had a bit of a setback with what I thought was a really simple idea, because for the life of me, I just wasn't able to drill a hole in this clutch arm. I'm guessing it's some sort of like hardened metal material. Yeah, I was trying to put a hole around here, thinking that the more central the spring is, the better, you know, so it won't be sort of pulling it like this or like this. But yeah, I literally just could not drill a hole in this at all. So what I've done instead is I've cut a couple of slits in it with an angle grinder, and what that will mean is that if I do end up setting up a return spring, I can just wrap the spring around here and it'll interlock nicely into those slots. So I'll chuck this back in the gearbox with the new bearing. I never know whether I should grease these clutch release bearings or not, because they're always sort of so enclosed, you know, like this one's got, you know, some sort of seal there. Even in there, I can't really, you know, that's not where the bearing is. So yeah, like you know, if you're going to grease it, it'd have to go in here. So I kind of assume that these are greased from the factory. Yeah, let us know in the comments. Are you supposed to grease clutch release bearings, or are they pre-greased? I will just try and poke some in there while I'm here. And someone in the comments recently said I shouldn't be using multi-purpose grease because apparently the clutch gets too hot for multi-purpose grease. So I'll just bung a little bit of this in this time. This is CV grease. So I'll just try and get it in there. I don't know whether I'm supposed to do this or not, but I will wipe any excess off, because you certainly don't want any excess grease in your bell housing. So I'll bung the arm in first, like so. There is a clip on the back of here that needs to interlock with this pivot ball, but do that after I've got the bearing on. And now I need to make my mind up, as I was explaining earlier, because this centre bit isn't, you know, dead square. I need to make my mind up which way round it should go. So this way is with the centre bit facing down the way. Let's try the other way. Yeah, this way definitely seems like, feels a bit more, you know, there's a bit more like friction. Whereas if I turn it around the other way again, that way definitely seems like there's less friction. Yeah, I think that's right. So the way it is the inner bit is facing downwards like that, if that makes sense. I hope so. All right, let's make sure this is clipped onto the ball, the pivot ball, properly. Which I can't show you, but I can feel by feel that the sort of bits of wire, one is either side of that pivot ball, so that's all in place. What I plan to do today at the same time as doing the clutch release bearing was to change Esther's sump gasket. Every time I get underneath this car, there's just traces of oil everywhere, you know, normally hanging off the bottom of this adapter plate, and on a lot of the sump bolts, especially on this passenger side, there's always a drip of oil, you know, on the head of each bolt. So, you know, I assumed that the sump gasket is leaking. I'm not sure if it is or isn't, to be honest. I did try and bodge this sump gasket up with sealer quite recently. So chances are the sump gasket is leaking. However, I noticed something today before I pulled this thing out of the garage at home that makes me think that the leak might be coming from somewhere else. I'll just get this starter motor out of the way and then I'll be able to have a better look myself and hopefully show you what I think I saw earlier. Yeah, the starter motor is literally covered in oil. Massive shout out to my good friend Lee Booth. You'll be happy to know that your welds are holding up really well. Now, as I say, you can see that on these bolt heads, there's, you know, a trace of oil. You know, you can see oil in general on the bottom of the sump and stuff. But what I noticed today was that there's oil sort of on this area here. There's a sort of puddle here. And what I noticed earlier is that when I sort of felt here, this is quite dry. And you can kind of see here now that the starter's out of the way, this is all dry. That there is sealer, that blackness that you can see. You know, this is all dry, you know, this is dry, but it is oily up there. And then what I noticed when I sort of rubbed my finger under this breather box is that there is oil. In fact, there's a drip just there. I think you can see that. So I'm actually thinking that maybe the gasket between this breather box thing and the block is leaking. Now, maybe the sump gasket's leaking as well, but yeah, I definitely think that this might be leaking. All whilst I've been messing around with Esther's gearbox, I've been sort of deciding to do the sump gasket today, then deciding not to. And, you know, I'm torn because, you know, when you do a sump gasket, you're essentially replacing all the oil. She is due an oil change. So it's like, I don't want to do the oil change until I know that I'm not going to be doing the sump gasket. And because she's due an oil change, now is the time to do the sump gasket if you're going to do it. And I thought I had a sump gasket in my garage. So whereas I sort of come to a conclusion today that even though I'm going to look at, you know, the gasket between that block breather and the block, I kind of thought I may as well just do the sump gasket as well. Why not? You know, give her the oil change that she needs, and then just see if, you know, doing those two gaskets has made this engine leak free. But as it turns out, I don't have a sump gasket in my garage, so that's kind of made my mind up in terms of doing the sump gasket. But yeah, I am going to change this gasket, although I can't get that breather box off whilst the engine mount is in situ. Now, I was kind of planning to just make a gasket for that, but what I did find in my garage today when I was looking for the sump gasket that wasn't there is a brand new genuine Ford gasket from my good friends at Burton Power. So yeah, let's see how much hassle it's going to be to chuck this on. I needed to free up my jack, so before attacking the breather box gasket, I decided to refit Esther's gearbox. I then removed the jack from underneath the gearbox and placed it underneath Esther's sump, and I used a piece of wood to protect it. Then I could start removing the engine mount. I first disconnected it from the cross member and then unbolted it from the side of Esther's block. One engine mount. The block breather or flame trap is attached to the block with 3 8mm bolts, and once they were removed, I was able to wriggle it out. I think this gasket might have been on the wrong way, so maybe that's why it was leaking. Pretty sure it's supposed to go that way, but we'll change it while we're here. Yeah, you can really see how flat the old one is compared to the new one that's still got a rib in it, I suppose you'd say. They're kind of like a groove in here, so I'm guessing that this raised bit needs to sit in that groove. So it must go that way. Anyway, now the breather box is out of the way, you can really see how much oil is around that area. All on that flat bit where the breather box sits, it is wet. Now that could have just got wet as I was taking it off, but yeah, there's like a drip there. I used the Kent Europe brake cleaner to clean the oil off the block. And here you can see how the bolts for the breather block actually lock into the gasket, holding the gasket in place, making the part easier to fit. And once it was fitted, it was time to put everything else back together, starting with the engine mount. The starter motor was covered in oil, so I gave it a clean, re-greased up the pinion before getting it refitted and wired back up. Next to go on was the prop shaft, and then I plugged in the reverse lights, which I forgot to do last time I was messing about with Esther's clutch. With the gearbox aligned and the mount nuts tightened, I refitted the standard rod to the slave cylinder and got that bolted back onto the bell housing. This time with my little return spring plate. All that was left to do was to refit the shifter with the brand new gasket and then get the battery reconnected. All right, mission complete. She is back together. Still need to get her back on the ground, of course. It's fair to say that the slave cylinder is a bit more of a nightmare to bolt in, even from underneath when I've got that plate there. But yeah, hopefully I can get hold of some sort of spring and yeah, stop the rattle. I'm pretty sure it is still going to rattle because I think that the rattle is just the clutch arm rattling about rather than, you know, a rattle coming from a worn bearing. I do have free play on the clutch arm. If I go from underneath, you know, there is plenty of free play there. So I don't think the adjustable slave cylinder rod is needed. I know that one of the times when I've put this thing together, you know, with a new clutch or whatever over the years with the RX-8 6-speed setup, there was a time when there wasn't any free play on the clutch arm. You know, maybe that's something to do with the clutch I was using at the time. But yeah, with this setup, with this clutch I'm using, there definitely seems to be, so that's absolutely fine. There was something I noticed underneath that might have been causing some of the rattles I've been having. This sort of ghetto protector for the flexi that my good friend Lee Booth welded into this exhaust. Yeah, I've just changed this. The one that was on there, it was sort of split, so it's only being held on with one Jubilee clip. So at the other Jubilee clip, you know, it in theory was able to rattle. So I don't know, maybe that could have been causing some of my rattles. But yeah, I don't know. Ultimately, there's no point me turning the engine on now to see if it rattles, because as we know from previous videos, you know, when I try and like fit the adjustable rod, for instance, I fire it up and the rattle's not there, and I think that it's all cured, and then I get a few miles down the road and the rattle comes back. So the only way to really test how noisy the clutch is now is to get it on the road. I was going to take Maud home today, but I think I am going to take Esther home just so we can see if there's any improvement on the clutch. And when I get home, I can have a look to see if there's any improvement with regards to the oil leak now that we've changed that block breather gasket. But I'm not holding my breath. I do think she's going to need a sump gasket as well. But yeah, we'll see. It's better sometimes just to change one thing at a time, so then you know which one of those things has cured your leak. And yeah, because I didn't have a sump gasket, I was kind of forced to not do the sump gasket today anyway. But yeah, right now I need to get out of here. Got a lot of packing up to do beforehand. Got to get Esther back on the ground, of course. And yeah, I'll chat to you when I'm on the way home.
All right, so I'm more than halfway home, and the journey home is like 30 or 40 minutes. So, you know, I've given it long enough to see if the rattle was going to come back, if it was. And yeah, it is not rattling in the same way that it was before. I can hear a lot of other rattles in the car because of it, but that's okay. That just sort of confirms that, yeah, the rattle that was there before in the clutch has now gone. Weirdly, I've now got a noise when I push the clutch. I'm not saying that noise wasn't there before, it's just that when you push the clutch before, the main rattle sort of went away. So psychologically, you know, the noise was less when you push the clutch, whereas now there's no rattle when you don't push the clutch, but there is when you do. But you know, those two scenarios, I'd rather it make a little rattle when you push the clutch than it make a rattle when you're not pressing the clutch, because most of the time when you're driving, you're not pushing the clutch, right? So yeah, it looks like the new bearing has solved the rattle. And that probably means I'm not going to need to bother hooking up a return spring, which is good. I don't think having a return spring is going to solve the rattle I've now got when I push the clutch. So, happy days. Maybe that issue all along was being caused by the worn bearing. Maybe the reason the bearing got worn is because that bearing was fitted when on one of my old clutches there wasn't any free play on that clutch arm. So, you know, back then the bearing would have just been under, you know, too much strain, because it would have always been under pressure regardless of whether you were pushing the clutch or not. I don't know, but I'm happy that, you know, the rattle seems to be better now that I've changed that bearing. The only question now is, have we solved the oil leak just by changing that gasket on the block breather?
Well, that little bit of the block below the block breather is dry. Still looks a bit shiny on the block breather itself, like around near where the bolts are, but I didn't thoroughly clean it before I refitted it. But in general, that block area looks dry. And underneath, I didn't actually thoroughly clean the sump, if I'm honest. But those bolt heads definitely look dry, whereas before they would always have a blob of oil on them. So we've definitely improved things. I should have really thoroughly cleaned the sump and then had a look, but you know, I'll keep an eye on it, and fingers crossed we might not need a sump gasket. Alright, so one thing that I didn't get a chance to look at on Esther in this video was a little bit of a running issue she's got. It only seems to be apparent when she's idling. She's absolutely fine when you're accelerating, perfect at full chat. But yeah, it just seems like she doesn't idle as smooth as she once did. Now, unfortunately, my laptop that I bought specifically to plug into the ECUs of my cars won't turn on, and I'm hoping it's just the power lead that's at fault. And I have ordered another power lead off of Amazon, so fingers crossed it is the power lead and not the actual laptop itself or the battery on it. And yeah, pretty soon I'll be able to plug the laptop into Esther's ME221 ECU and see if there's anything going on. I did have the problem last year that I found where the VVT solenoid doesn't seem to be communicating with the laptop. You know, it doesn't show the advance on the cam, but the VVT is clearly still working, because when it's not, you really notice the lack of power. So, you know, maybe it'll give me an opportunity to rewire up the VVT solenoid and see if I can figure out what's going on there. But yeah, as I say, she still runs sweet when you're at full chat. So it's kind of, you know, something I've been ignoring, but, you know, she is idling a little bit rough. Maybe it's down to a coil pack breaking down or the leads, I don't know. So yeah, that's something I was planning to have a look at in this video. I've got some new brakes to go on the front of Esther, of course, very soon, which is going to free up her brakes to fit to Heidi. So yeah, looking forward to diving into that. But in the next video, I'm probably going to be diving back into doing something or other with Heidi, maybe even diving into addressing some bodywork, using the materials that I picked up from my friends at BODICRAFT in Watford. Now, I've had loads of people getting in touch with me asking me if there's any more space on my stand for the Ford show at Santa Pod in July. I'm going to be booking that club stand at the end of this month. So the 31st of May is the deadline. All Fords are welcome. It doesn't matter what your budget is. It doesn't matter how mint your car is, what spec your car is. Everyone's welcome on my club stands. If you want to get on my club stand, just drop an email to marcushayesuk@gmail.com and I'll reply to you with details about how to get on my club stand. Another thing that's going to be happening at the end of this month is the draw to win a free Mark 1 Fiesta XR2 mug from my new company, petrolheadstyle.com, and a free Mark 1 Fiesta XR2 sticker. Just head over to petrolheadstyle.com, scroll down to the bottom of any page on that website and join our email mailing list. You literally just type in your email address, click the arrow, and you're going to be entered into all future competitions. I've actually got a brand new design that I'm going to be releasing very soon, and today, as it happens, I'm rocking my Cozy Power shirt, which is available on the website. So yeah, feel free to check out the products that are available on Petrolhead Style. And even if you don't want to buy anything, if you could just go onto the website, check it out, click on a few pages, you know, spread the word about it. The more people that go onto that website, the more it's going to rank in Google, and you know, the more likely I'm going to get people to visit that website, and yeah, the more likely that that new company will be a success. And don't forget, if you do want to grab anything from Petrolhead Style or from marcushayesuk.com, I'm running a discount code at the moment, MH10, which works on both websites, and that's the same discount that you can use to grab some bits from my friends at BODICRAFT in Watford as well. So that's it for this video. Massive thanks as always to everyone who's tuned in. If you did think it was any good, please do give it a thumbs up and a share. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down, click subscribe if you're new. Check out the links in the description to follow me on social media. You can also follow Petrolhead Style on Facebook and Instagram. I'll leave those links in the description. Massive thanks as always to my patrons for your ongoing support. But yeah, other than that, I'll chat to you in the next video.